Kristallnacht was the most horrific turning point in my family's life in Germany. As you know, it happened on November 9th, 1938, where the Nazis were burning down synagogues, burning down the homes of Jews, their businesses, and they took everything from my family. My family was very successful. My grandfather had a very successful business. He was a manufacturer. He had many friends and many clients that loved him. And on Kristallnacht, everything was gone. They stole everything. And on November 10th, the day after Kristallnacht, was when my grandfather was dragged out of his home and taken to Dachau concentration camp. So, as the destruction and burning down of Jewish synagogues and homes and businesses took place, Jews could no longer get out of Germany. Whoever was left and was not already sent to camps was then rounded up and sent to death camps. Many Jews America had closed its doors to most Jewish immigrants at that point, and the Jews were trying to go anywhere, Argentina, Israel, any country that would let them in. But at that point, after Kristallnacht, they could not get out of Germany. So the book the memoir that my mom wrote, Escape from Dachau, describes the horrific situation in Germany, Kristallnacht, and then, of course, what happened to my grandfather. And after he was sent to Dachau concentration camp, that begins the most courageous, daring, unbelievable rescue story, which is really the basis of my mom's memoir, because it really points out how there were very courageous people willing to risk their lives to help. In this particular situation, it's an unbelievable story because my grandmother's first cousin actually worked for the Third Reich early on. The name Schach will be familiar to you because he was tried at the Nuremberg trials. He was, before Hitler took office, he was the the president of the biggest bank in Germany, the Reich Bank, which was based in Berlin. And my grandmother's first cousin worked for Schach at the bank. And when Hitler took Schach to be his Minister of Economics and Finance, he actually took my grandmother's first cousin, Emanuel Rosenfeld, to work for him because he was the mathematician. He was the numbers guy. He was the brains in the bank. A Jew actually worked for the Third Reich. And when things started to get really bad, he got scared, he quit, he changed his name and applied to get out of Berlin. And just as he received his papers and his visa to leave Germany, he gets the call from my grandmother's first cousin that grandpa was taken to Dachau and he had to try to do something. When he left working for the Third Reich, he actually was smart and he kept his government identification papers that identified him as a government official for the Third Reich. And he made this excruciating decision. Instead of leaving Berlin and saving his life and getting out immediately, he made the decision to drive the 500 kilometers in the middle of the night from Berlin to Dachau and try to get my grandfather out. And he got through each and every checkpoint by showing these expired identification papers. And, at night, the Nazi guards were these young, scared guards. They didn't want to do anything wrong. And when they were presented with papers that said, this is a government official, they let him through. my grandmother's first cousin, his birth name was Emanuel Rosenfeld, but he changed his name to Max Emanuel, goes with these government official ID papers, gets through checkpoint after checkpoint. No one opens the papers because the cover identifies him. If they had opened those papers and saw that the name there was Emanuel Rosenfeld, that would have been the end, because that's a Jewish name. And they wouldn't have cared. They would have thought they were stolen papers, whatever. These young guards at the checkpoints at midnight did not open, just looked at the outside and let him through. So my grandmother's first cousin arrives at the gate of Dachau, scared to death, shaking, sweating, and tries to muster up as much strength as he can and says, "Bring me this Adolf Mueller." By the way, that was my grandfather's name, Adolf Mueller. He says, "Bring me this Adolf Mueller." And the guards, seeing the identification papers, they probably thought they wanted to take this man out in the backyard and just shoot him. They go and they bring out this man that Max Emanuel did not recognize. He was so emaciated that he said to the guards, "Is this Adolf Mueller?" And they said, "Yes, it is." And apparently they looked in each other's eyes. They recognized through their eyes who they were. He roughly loads my grandfather into the car, again, acting like this is official business, and off they go. And he was out. Just like that, he was out. And they drove from Dachau to Stuttgart, where they knew where my mom was because she was at the Catholic Church. They got her and they got my grandmother, and off they went to Antwerp, Belgium, which is where one of her brothers was. One was in Luxembourg, because that's where, actually, they first went to Luxembourg to her brother. And eventually they waited there a year to get their papers to leave Luxembourg, and they left via Belgium, Antwerp, Belgium. That is what Escape from Dachau is all about. But Kristallnacht destroyed many lives. You know, you have to remember that the German Jews were loyal citizens. My grandfather fought for Germany in World War I. My grandmother and her sisters were volunteers in the German Red Cross during World War I. They were doctors, lawyers, engineers, architects. They were business people. They were great contributors to art, music, science, and technology. Did not matter. Did not matter. And that was one of the reasons why, when my grandmother's brothers and sisters were getting out, he didn't leave. He said, "I'm a loyal German. They would never do this to a loyal German. I have served Germany." And so he waited too long to get out. And in fact, his sister, her husband, and their children were killed at Auschwitz. So the Mueller family waited too long. The Folk family, which was my grandmother's maiden name, most of them got out. They left early. They left in the 20s, in the early 30s, when they saw the writing on the wall. And this group of criminals, of hoodlums called the Brown Shirts, were walking around the streets with permission. They were harassing and beating innocent Jews in the streets. My mother was thrown out. She was 10 years old at the time, thrown out of her public school because she was Jewish. Jews could no longer go to public schools. They couldn't go into the stores. "No Jews allowed" were posted on the store windows. And that's what happened. My mom, when my grandfather was dragged out of the home the day after Kristallnacht, my grandmother brought my mom to the Catholic Church, who took her in and hid her. And that's how my mom survived. We do not know where my grandmother was during this time because my grandmother, my grandfather, and my mom never spoke a word of what happened to them until the year 2000, when my mom sat down and wrote her memoir. Not a word was spoken. And my grandfather did not recover. My memory of my grandfather was him sitting in front of the living room window, staring out the window, smoking his cigar. He was a broken man. And yes, he escaped, but he really never recovered from this experience. The lesson of Kristallnacht, starting on November 9th, 1938, is that this was an orgy of violence. The participants included police, neighbors, friends, who collaborated. No one, maybe out of fear, but no one stood forward. No one came out and tried to help to stop this, to resist. And the world stood by and basically did nothing as well. And the lesson to be learned is that when evil happens, when we see this kind of violence, we do need to step forward. We do need to speak out. Even the media was involved in the hate and the evil that was going on. And if enough people stand up, things like this can stop. They don't have to happen, and history does not have to repeat itself.